Welcome back to another FPL video ahead of Game Week 8. This will be the best wildcard team. I've activated the chip myself this week so you can see my thoughts and current squad in the team selection video. But today I'm going to be showing you 3 different drafts, primarily focusing on one, but I want to show you 3 different ones covering as many key assets as possible. And in the comment section down below, I want you to let me know your thoughts in terms of the best wildcard draft shown today and any other players you would include on the wildcard in Game Week 8. If you end up enjoying this video, smash the like button and subscribe for new. Our target is to get to over 300 likes on this video and to get to 21,000 subscribers by the end of the week. We're around 100 subscribers away, and thank you to all the new patrons and channel members who have signed up. Your support is very much appreciated, and to all the subscribers who have helped to build our channel. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. I have gone for the same goalkeepers as last week in Leno and Areola, but there is a debate to go for Areola and Turner and invest as much money as possible in the outfield positions and a minimal amount in the goalkeeper positions. And I don't think that's a bad strategy per se. Areola's been a fantastic FPL option this season. He can save penalties, he makes a lot of saves in general, and can get some bonus points, a few clean sheets on the way as well. And at his price, he's an absolute bargain. Now, one alternative to Burnt Leno is Johnston, who kept a clean sheet in a 1-0 victory over Man United at Old Trafford nonetheless. And I also think there's a few other goalkeepers here and there like Flecken who are still decent, but with the injuries to Ben Mee and Rico Henry, I would steer clear from Brentford and just focus on the likes of Leno and Areola. And if you don't want to go for Leno, maybe Johnston is the best alternative. I wouldn't spend too much money in this position. Even Nick Pope, as good as his fixtures are, I don't think he's worth it. And if you want to spend 5.5 million or over, you should just go for Trippier to cover the Newcastle defence. So my goalkeepers here are Leno and Areola. They've got a good combination in terms of fixtures. They rotate very well. Another good goalkeeper combination would be Areola and Neto from Bournemouth. But once again, I don't trust Bournemouth defensively, even as much as the likes of Fulham and Crystal Palace. So Johnston and Leno for me are the 2 best goalkeepers to buy as your main goalkeeper. And Areola could be seen as a backup, but he could start the vast majority of games in the next 5 game weeks. I have invested a fair amount of money into the defence, starting with Matty Cash, who is now 4.8 million. He's going to keep on rising in price, and Aston Villa have the best fixtures over the next 5 game weeks. That doesn't mean you need to triple up on them though. The same goes for Tottenham Hotspur. But I think a double up is definitely viable. And once you get to Game Week 13, when Aston Villa face Tottenham, you can start trimming down your Aston Villa assets, or wait until Game Week 15 after they play Bournemouth in Game Week 14. And once Aston Villa embark on a very difficult fixture run, you can start selling the likes of Watkins, Matty Cash, Diaby, or any other Aston Villa assets you may have. But I think Matty Cash is a very good option over the next 5 to 7 game weeks. And I'd only bench him in one of those game weeks, which is in Game Week 13 against Tottenham away. As for purposes of Stupinian, a lot of people will be selling. He is owned by around 60% of managers, and he scored an own goal against Aston Villa as Brighton got absolutely demolished. But he is a really good option from game weeks 10 to 16, and I think it's worth holding him, benching him against Liverpool and Man City, then reintroducing him into your starting 11 by game week 10 when he faces Fulham at home. So I wouldn't lose faith just yet, and by game week 10 you might want to double up, and I think the best Brighton assets are Stupinian and Mitoma. I would completely avoid the goalkeepers. There's too much rotation happening there, and the same goes for the forwards. As much as I rate even Ferguson, there's still too much rotation in that position, and I would completely avoid them. The same goes for Joao Pedro as well. So Stupinian and Mitoma are the best ways of covering Brighton, both offensively and defensively. I've also gone for a double up in Newcastle defensively with Burn and Trippier. If Botman didn't get injured, he would be in for Dan Burn, and you do save 0.2 million this way, and Dan Burn is a good option that you can sometimes bench, and when Newcastle have a plum fixture, you could double up and really target Newcastle and that fixture for the clean sheet chances. They're on the back of 4 clean sheets in a row at the time of this recording. They're yet to play Paris Saint-Germain later this evening, but they still look such a decent proposition, and even with Lascelles filling in for Botman over the next Premier League game or so, I still think that Newcastle can keep clean sheets. West Ham away won't be easy, but you only need to start Trippier in Game Week 8. And Udogie is the final defender. Now, if you can afford it, I think Pedro Porro could be a fantastic differential and worth the extra 0.2 million. But because we're kind of tight on budget in most of these drafts, I have gone for Udogie here but Pedro Porro is also a very solid option. And in the last 5 game weeks, he's had 8 shots compared to a doggy's 0. And in terms of all the underlying metrics, Pedro Porro is also a bit more impressive. And generally speaking, he is better offensively than Destiny or Doggy. But this is a very solid back 5. There's no Arsenal or Man City covered. They both face each other in Game Week 8, and their fixtures aren't particularly great over the next 3 to 5 game weeks, especially in Man City's case. Their fixtures are quite poor up until Game Week 16. But this defensive 5, they all have good fixtures in the long term. And even with the likes of a Stupinian, you can bench him in the next 2 and start the likes of Cash, Trippier and a Doggy. I think this is one of the strongest midfields you can assemble in Game Week 8, starting with Mohamed Salah facing Brighton away, which isn't the easiest fixture, but I think the way Brighton play could fall into Salah's hands, and Liverpool could bounce back after the fast that happened on Sunday. And Salah is so consistent. If that goal wasn't wrongfully disallowed for Luis Diaz, that would have been another Salah assist and a run of 13 games in a row where he produced a return. So he has been on absolute fire, Mohamed Salah. And whilst he might have lost his head a little bit after, and rightfully so, I still think Salah will bounce back and do really well over the next coming game weeks, especially against Everton and Nottingham Forest. Not to mention Luton Town away between game weeks 9 to 11. So I think Mohamed Salah is worth the price. The problem is, when you have Salah and Erling Haaland, you do have an imbalance in your 50-man squad, and you don't want to have some weak players starting every single week because you're trying to fit both of them in to your FPL team. I've gone for a double up in Spurs offensively with Maddison and Heung-min Son. For me, they're the 2 best Spurs assets, period. And James Maddison is almost impeccable away from home, but both of them are nursing some injury problems. So Heung-min Son, I don't think he's trained just yet, so let's keep an eye on that situation. I think he will be available for Luton Town away, but it's something to monitor. And there's always this talk about the early kickoff curse, and Spurs do kick off Game Week 8, and it could be a bit of a concern there from that perspective, but I'm not really going to share that this time out. And I think Maddison and Son are the best captaincy options in Game Week 8, and I would say Maddison, because of his away record, could be even better than the South Korean, but having both of them is just a really good way of covering Tottenham Hotspur. But around Game Week 10, you could sell Heung-min Son to Bukayo Saka, especially if Saka is fit by that time, and I think he will be by Game Week 8, of course, but we'll talk more about that as the week progresses. I've also gone for Diaby. He's another one who's got an injury problem. He picked up a knock against Brighton, but I think he'll be fine, to be honest, and maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic because after all, I thought Saka, Botman and all these players would start at the weekend, and whilst I was right about some, I was completely wrong about the others, which led to a disastrous game week yet again for me in double game week 7. The last midfielder is Jarrod Bowen. I have to say I've been very impressed by him this season. I was talking about him a lot last season and the year before that, and he was disappointing in the last campaign, but after scoring in the Conference League final and his good pre-season, he's following that up with a very good start in the Premier League this time out. And even though James Ward-Prowse is really good, he's a bonus points magnet, he's on set pieces, can get goals and assists in most games, I think Jarrod Bowen is more explosive and potentially worth the extra 0.9 million over James Ward-Prowse. But I think either Bowen or Ward-Prowse will be great assets and acquisitions to your FPL team. But if I had to pick one, it would be Jarrod Bowen. You have to make sacrifices one way or another. If you've got Trippier, Son, Salah and Haaland all at the same time, you're probably going to have a weak 15-man squad overall, a very weak bench, not enough squad depth, and you could be in trouble in certain game weeks. But if you do go for 3 of those 4, then you have to miss out on one of them. And in this wildcard draft, there is no Erling Haaland, but I have to be very, very skeptical about this, and I have to also urge caution because it is going to be a big risk. Going without a player with over 90% ownership, yes, he'll probably go down as the weeks go on, but by Game Week 11, for example, when he faces Bournemouth at home, he could go absolutely ballistic. And even against Arsenal and Man United away, Brighton at home, Haaland is still a good option to have. But the argument here is, if you're not going to captain him much, if at all, over the next 7 game weeks, you can go without him. But with this wildcard draft, what I would recommend, if you decide to go with something like this, is to bring Haaland back in around Game Week 11, and that would mean selling Salah when he faces Luton Town away, so it can backfire. But ultimately, Haaland at home to Bournemouth, I would give him the edge in that game week. And long term, Man City would have some good fixtures up until the Christmas period. But I have to say, between game weeks 8 to 16, there is a pretty poor fixture on there for the citizens, but they are fixture proof. Haaland is fixture proof. He can score against absolutely anybody, and he could be a huge miss to your FPL team. So it's all about prioritizing. With this squad, you can captain Salah in game weeks 9 and 10. You can captain Heung-min Son this week against Luton Town away, and in game week 11, if you decide to persist with Salah, you can captain him yet again against Luton Town away. So you've got some very good fixtures with the likes of Salah, Son and Maddison. And another thing you can do, as I mentioned earlier, is move Son to Saka around game week 10, and then in game week 11 or maybe 12, 13, whenever you choose, you can go back to Erling Haaland and sell Alvarez, and maybe for Salah you can get another midfielder entirely, like Bukayo Saka for example, but it really just depends on your strategy and your plans. With this front three though, it's still solid. You've got Alvarez, who's only 7 points off Erling Haaland after all, and there is a huge difference in price between the two, around 7 million. So I have to say Alvarez has caught up pretty well to the Norwegian robot so far. Let's see if he can continue that until the end of the campaign, but more importantly, until the Christmas period, which this wildcard will set you up for pretty well. I've also gone for Ollie Watkins. One of my biggest mistakes this season was selling him last week in game week 6 to Alvarez, and whilst Alvarez continues to do well, things definitely went the other way, and Watkins has gone absolutely ballistic in that time period, scoring 4 goals and picking up 2 assists in the process. And with the next 5 fixtures, I would not go against Ollie Watkins at this stage. He is fixture proof as well because he produced his biggest returns against Chelsea and Brighton, and in the easier games, so to speak, he wasn't able to match that or even score a single Premier League goal. But that's football, and it's just so unpredictable at this point. But I've always said this about Unai Emery. He just seems to find a way of getting the absolute best of his strikers, whether it's Edinson Cavani, whether it's Aubameyang, Lacazette, Carlos Bacca, and now Ollie Watkins is the next beneficiary of Emery's development of strikers. The third forward I've got here is Archer. He's just a budget option. You could go for Mabama, and that saves you 0.2 million, or you could go for maybe Muniz from Fulham, who is 4.4 million. So you don't really need to think about this position too much, but Archer could go up in price to 4.6 million, and he is the best third forward if you aren't going for a so-called playing forward in your starting 11, and he's just going to be on your bench permanently. So I've gone for Archer here, but you don't have to go for him. You could go for someone even cheaper, and there is more of a shift, I think, towards a front three. And if you were to go for 3 forwards, in my opinion, the 3 best are Haaland, Watkins and Alvarez, but that does mean you have to downgrade one of your midfielders to a complete budget option, and you might not be able to go for Salah or maybe a Heung-min Son, and that could be a bit difficult as well to cope with. But let me now show you FPL.team, what the lineup would be in Game Week 8 with this wildcard squad, and then show you some other wildcard drafts so you can compare them and make your own judgment. On the FPL.team website, it says I've got 2.2 million in the bank, but I've actually got 2.4 million. So this squad is very affordable to everyone watching. I've got Bern Leno in goal at home to Sheffield United, a defensive 3 of Trippier, Udogie and Matty Cash, a midfield 5 of Bowen, Son, Maddison, Salah and Diaby, and a front 2 of Alvarez and Ollie Watkins. And even the bench is quite solid with Areola, Byrne, Estupinian and Cameron Archer. Now, there are a few issues, of course. No Erling Haaland is going to be a big talking point. And one issue is that it's going to be difficult to get him in 2 moves. You will have to make 3 moves, potentially take a hit, or kind of spread your transfers over the next 3 game weeks, and that could prevent you from doing Heung-min Son to Saka per se. But one possibility for you by game week 11, so by the time that Haaland plays Bournemouth at home and you probably want him back because you don't want your rank decimated, is to do something like this. So over the next coming weeks, you can do something like this. Haaland in for Alvarez by the time you get to game week 11. You can also do Salah to Saka, but that also means you might have to go without Jarrod Bowen and instead go for the cheaper Ward-Prowse. And as you can see, that's 0.0 million in the bank. Some of you watching might not be able to afford that, and it's very risky. You have to weigh that up, the risk versus reward. Are you going to go about Haaland? Are you going to try to be a bit too clever and go against him and maybe captain the likes of Salah before bringing in the likes of Saka and Erling Haaland? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but that's something you really need to weigh up before ultimately deciding whether you go for Bowen over James Ward-Prowse, whether you go for Salah, but then you have Trippier as well and Heung-min Son, which ultimately means you can't go for Erling Haaland up front. But I think that wildcard squad still looks pretty good, and overall, I still think there is merit to going for Jared Bowen, going for Mohamed Salah, and going without Saka for the time being. And then instead of Erling Haaland, you've got Alvarez, who is covering the same team. And like I said, only a difference of 7 points so far this season. I don't think that'll be the case by the time we get to Gameweek 38, but we don't have to look that far ahead just yet. And let's not forget, Man City have one of the worst fixture runs of any top 6 team that we've seen so far this season up until Gameweek 16. Another wildcard draft here includes Johnston in goal instead of Bernd Leno. We've got a very similar defensive three, but Pedro Porro comes in instead of Destiny Udogie. And we've also got Bukayo Saka and James Ward-Prowse in this midfield five. And we've also got Erling Haaland, but there is no Mohamed Salah. That's obviously going to be a big miss, especially in game weeks 9 to 11. But ultimately, you can't cover every single asset and you need to prioritize. There is obviously a way of having Haaland and Salah, but it probably means no Kieran Trippier as well, which I'll show you with the third draft. But I have to say, I really like this team as well. Johnston in goal, Pedro Porro, Cash, Trippier as the back three, all 5 midfielders starting, and Erling Haaland and Ollie Watkins up front. The bench, once again, very similar, pretty much the exact same with Areola, Byrne, Estupinian, and Cameron Archer. And with this squad, we've got 0.1 million left in the bank. The big issue, though, is that Saka is a doubt to face Man City after picking up yet another knock. This time it is a muscle injury, so there is some concerns about Arsenal and Bukayo Saka. He could miss the next few weeks, but let's wait and see. I still think he will start if the injury isn't too serious at the weekend, but over the last few games against Spurs, Bournemouth and Lens, you just see him constantly in pain and coming off with an injury. So it's not ideal, and Saka is still a very good long-term option, but he is not going to be a lock-in for this specific wildcard draft that you see. But I'm covering him because he deserves to be covered. He's one of the best FPL options, period. I would expect them to be the closest to Mohamed Salah in the midfielder rankings, and overall, he is not an injury-prone player. He starts so many games consecutively, and in terms of appearances for Arsenal, he set a new record, featuring in 87 or 88 consecutive games for the Gunners in the Premier League. It's absolutely insane, especially considering his age, but let's wait and see how that injury develops. In terms of the captaincy for all of the drafts, I would target Spurs, despite the fact that they play in the early kickoff, but Luton Town is still a fixture to target. They just lost to Burnley 2-1 on Tuesday, and that was actually my prediction, one of the few that I got right this weekend. But I think Heung-min Son or Maddison are the best captains, and if I had to go for an alternative, it probably is Mohamed Salah, who featured in the first draft. The final wildcard squad I will show you is also quite similar. We've got the likes of Johnston in there, but also Anderson, and I'm not too sure about that double up, to be quite frank with you. That isn't really going to be ideal, and once again, we're really stretching the budget and we've got nothing left in the bank. So one thing you could do, maybe to give yourself a bit more leeway or even to afford this team, is just to go for Turner, and you could start either Areola or Turner depending on your preference. And we're going for a back four here of Dan Burn, Cash, Anderson and Udogie, a midfield four of Salah, Diaby, Son, Maddison, and a front two of Watkins and Haaland. The bench is Areola, Estupinian, Chukwuemeka and Mobama, so you can afford this. But of course you can go for Muniz, or you can go for Cameron Archer if you've got the funds as well. And yeah, I think I'd just go for Areola, despite the fact that Newcastle have a good chance of scoring, because Areola is just such a good FPL option at this point in time. And this looks like a very solid squad actually, considering you have Salah, Son, Maddison, Haaland, but there is no Kieran Trippier, and you just can't cover all of these amazing options at the same time. You have to make sacrifices somewhere down the line, and you have to prioritize certain players over others, like Salah over Haaland. And if you have both, you have to sacrifice the likes of Heung-min Son, Saka, and or Trippier. So there's so much to discuss in Game Week 8. Let me know your favourite wildcard draft from the three I showed. I'm currently leaning towards the first one, of course, but the second one is also pretty decent. Despite having all of the kind of key options except Trippier in this draft, I'm not too sure about this balance, and I think the bench is slightly weaker compared to the other drafts I've shown you. There is other things you can do, of course. You can downgrade Estupinian, going for a cheaper defender like Gabriel even, and that allows you to maybe upgrade another position. But ultimately, there's not much I would change with the extra maybe 0.6 million you would get by selling Estupinian to Gabriel. And ultimately, this is still a good wildcard draft, but a bit imbalanced for my liking. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to over 300 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 21,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon and channel memberships for exclusive early access to my videos being featured on the front page of my YouTube channel, and also access to all my team reveals as soon as I make the transfers. And you can also check the Discord server to engage with the community. There is also my Twitter and Instagram, like I said, all those links are there, and the FPL League where we have thousands of members in FPL and UCL Fantasy, and we want to keep on growing those communities even further and potentially having the FPL and or UCL Fantasy winner in our league. That would be great, of course. Thank you very much for watching. All your support is massively appreciated. A huge shout out goes to the channel members and patrons as always, and I'll see you next time.